So I have an illustration here on the lectitude that I'd like to go over. And you have your torque converter in the middle, but let's go ahead and discuss this. So here's your engine. Your engine's in blue, and then the engine has the crankshaft that turns this flywheel. So this is your flywheel. That flywheel is bolted to the housing of the torque converter. So the housing is, if you at the bottom here, you'll see it is the red, but also all the way around to the silver, what we call the impeller. Okay. In the middle here, you have your turbine, but your turbine never achieves lockup. So this dial on the right represents the RPM of the impeller. This RPM gauge on the left represents your turbine speed, which is spline to your input shaft turning your transmission. So notice we don't have a complete lockup. So we put a torque converter clutch in the front of the turbine. It's actually splined onto the turbine, and I'm going to activate it like a car computer would by switching the activating clutch right here. And you'll see that clutch moves away from the turbine and contacts the housing of the torque converter. And then looking at the gauges now match and provide one-to-one turning. So the flywheel is turning at the same speed as the input shaft and whatever it splines to in the transmission. So this would be an example of a lockup converter. And then this would be example of a converter that is not locked up. Okay. So lockup, again, is to achieve good fuel economy at a cruise condition. It does not multiply torque. It is to eliminate the slip between the turbine, which is where I'm pointing at, and the impeller. And it is spline. So then the input shaft of the transmission is turning the same speed as the crankshaft in the flywheel.
Torque converters have three stages of operation. The first phase is called stall. Here, the engine applies power to the impeller, but the turbine does not rotate because the driver keeps his or her foot on the brake at traffic lights, so the vehicle does not move. The second phase is called acceleration and takes place when the traffic lights turn green. The brakes are not applied, and the driver presses the accelerator pedal. Consequently, the impeller rotates faster, but there is a relatively large difference between impeller and turbine speed. Under this condition, the converter produces torque multiplication. For acceleration, this torque multiplication is needed. The third phase is called coupling. The vehicle moves fast. The turbine has reached approximately 90% of the speed of the impeller, and the torque multiplication has ceased. Now, the torque converter is a simple fluid coupling. Modern vehicles use at this stage of operation a lockup clutch to lock the turbine to the impeller. This eliminates losses associated with fluid drive.
Okay, to get started, we're going to go ahead and hit scanner. We're dealing with a 2001 Saturn. I'm going to pick Saturn. Let's see, right here. And hopefully we could do the automatic ID. If not, then I got to manually put in my VIN number. And it did recognize it, so I'm happy. Okay, 2001 Saturn L Series 300. Hit start. Okay, so I want to go to transmission. And let's do it. If you're going to go for a test drive, do data display. I'm going to go to data display, and this is where you would pick what data you want to look at for the torque converter clutch lockup. So I'm going to want output RPM, maybe vehicle speed, input RPM, and where is torque converter clutch duty cycle? That tells me the amount of lockup we have. Now, I don't know if I like everything here, so I'm going to back up because I would like to know my RPM. So let's go back and let's try engine and data display. And I want to do inputs, not output data. And let's see, I want my engine speed, and I'm looking for torque converter clutch. Vehicle speed, yes, I would take that. O2 sensor, fuel, torque requested. That, I'm not really quite sure what that is. Torque delivered. I think that's just referring to the amount of torque an engine is creating. So we got to go back to transmission. Alright, let's go to transmission and data display. And torque converter clutch release pressure, that might be interesting. This is transmission fluid pressure switch A, pressure switch B. Vehicle speed and output RPM is not bad. Duty cycle, definitely. So I want to go for a test drive with this and with input RPM, which is my turbine speed. Unfortunately, I do not get the RPM, which is a real problem. The other choice we have is going back to functional tests. Functional tests are output state controls, and allows you to turn something on. Torque converter clutch solenoid. And this will probably give me the PIDs that I want to match up turbine speed to RPM speed of the engine. So I can command it on, I can command it off. I could go ahead and look at my torque converter clutch duty cycle, and it's giving me my input RPM. I'm not quite happy that doesn't give me my engine RPM, but it's what we are given. You could use this screen to put a car in a lift and turn this on, but it's going to probably tell you to turn it on when the vehicle is at 40 miles an hour or above. Okay? All right, we're going to go for a test drive. Okay, we're driving on the car right now. I can't control the glare. I tried multiple ways. You can see I just went from one light to another light. In the upper left-hand corner, my torque converter clutch locked up to almost 40%. This is a duty cycle clutch, torque converter clutch, so it modulates how much it is applied. It's not always 100%. So I'm at a stop sign right now. Here's my RPM gauge because the scanner won't give me that. So when I see the torque converter clutch applied, I'm going to look at my RPM gauge, and then I'm going to compare it to my readings here on the scanner. Here we go. So I'm accelerating right now. You can watch my speed in the upper right hand corner. Alright, 25 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour. There we go. Right on 40 miles an hour, just like I said. I'm at 2,400 RPM, 2,600 RPM. And I just felt it shift right there to the final fourth gear overdrive. And it looks like we're at complete lockup, or like my input shaft speed is matching my RPM right here. So right now I'm at 200. And I look over here and it looks like I'm at about 2200 too. But you can see why, which I really don't like that I don't have the option of comparing my RPM of my motor to the RPM of my turbine speed, because the input shaft RPM is your turbine speed. Okay? Alright, so that's pretty much it. And I actually had to run over a block of wood just to make this video. Now it should come on, so I'm doing about 35 miles an hour and I'm going up a slight incline. As soon as I get up to about 40 miles an hour, that duty cycle should kick in, and there it does. Okay, perfect. I'm at quarter throttle, 35 miles an hour with a slight hill, and you can see that it's 68% applied. If I give it any gas, it goes to 0. Okay, and this is how you would test your torque converter clutch. You would get it so it's starting to lock up. Get the motor to kind of lug on a slight incline. So I'm going on a slight incline. And then you would give it a little bit of gas slowly, watching that torque converter clutch and feeling for it, any kind of vibration coming from the floorboards. What we're going to do, but I want to go over functional tests. Functional tests, you could turn on any shift solenoid by manually activating, or you could do your torque converter clutch solenoid, and it won't let me do it because we need to have it at 35 miles an hour. But this is where you could actually put the car up on the lift and you could activate your scanner, you activate the solenoid and watch the parameters.